housing economist in the Delaware Valley. I know many of you probably already read Kevin's quotes, which are often found in the Philadelphia Inquirer. The Inquirer recently described me as our foremost expert on property values in the Philadelphia region. Kevin has recently done work with the Congress of New Urbanism, which he's going to share with us this morning, which I think are a very nice compliment to the work that Chris has done recently through GW and Brookings. So Kevin, thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much for having me here today. As Jason mentioned, I'm an economist, and I'm here to present the results of a study that actually the Congress of New Urbanism not only funded, but was actually releasing today, so you actually get to be the first to see this. What is of interest to us urban economists in recent years, as we've experienced an unprecedented downturn in the housing market, is not just the magnitude of that downturn, but the structure or flavor of it as well. We not only have not seen price deflation in housing of this magnitude since the Great Depression, but we haven't seen deflation of this type. That is, how it is correlated with elements of design, how it's correlated with location, how it's correlated with the types of demographics of where that deflation has occurred. And so the Congress of New Urbanism asked me if I could undertake a study here in the Philadelphia region looking at the variation in price deflation across the region and examining which areas held up their values better relative to others and why that would be. And that's what we're going to look at this morning. So the project motivation here, like I said, the Congress of New Urbanism asked me if and how variation in urban form and composition may be influencing the relative performance of our local residential real estate markets. We know that, generally speaking, a confluence of factors, including things like energy costs, growing awareness of environmental issues, escalating infrastructure costs, rapid changes in credit markets, demographic trends, things like that, have potentially altered the real estate landscape. The traditional models of development, building single-family detached, conventional use, auto-oriented development, by and large, is changing and changing rapidly, as the other presenters this morning have pointed out. So what we did in this study is we analyzed the market performance of residential properties in the Philadelphia region, comparing how properties have changed in value in centrally located, walkable, transit-oriented, mixed-use, sustainable communities relative to your more peripherally located, conventional, auto-oriented, single-use, low-density housing developments. Just to sort of get this project motivated, here's a chart showing the total decline in house prices by metropolitan area for the top 20 largest metropolitan areas in the United States from peak to trough. By and large, the conventional wisdom is the market has bottomed out and is stabilizing, so now we can look back and actually measure from peak to trough with the awareness that we actually have hopefully hit that trough. So from left to right, you can see in ascending order those markets which have deflated from least to most. So all the way up there on the left, you see places like Dallas, Denver, Boston. Philadelphia is the red bar from peak to trough. House prices in this region on average fell about 24%. The black bar in the middle is the average across the 20 largest metro areas, 34% deflation. So here in Philadelphia, we relatively outperform the national market in that our homes here held their value better than homes in most other parts of the country. All the way over on the right-hand side, you see the ones that really got hit with the housing bubble: Phoenix's, Vegas's, Miami's, Tampa, Detroit. What is interesting to me about this chart isn't that there's such dramatic variation in house price deflation across the country, but it's not exactly clear what the correlates of that deflation are. For example, Las Vegas is a relatively sprawling place, so is Phoenix, and they experience significant deflation. But places like Tampa or San Francisco are relatively more compact, walkable, walk-ups, as Mr. Leinberger pointed out, type places, yet they still experience significant deflation. On the other extreme, you see Dallas, Denver, again, relatively sprawling places, auto-oriented type places, relatively young cities. Very, very little price deflation there. Conversely, Boston, certainly a classic example of a walk-up type city. Again, as well as Philadelphia, also relatively little deflation. So urban form, just on the face of it, doesn't appear to completely explain the correlation in house price declines across different U.S. cities. We think it must be something a little more nuanced than that. So we're going to ask the question, how are house price declines correlated with urban form? We're going to evaluate the market performance of different communities here in the Delaware Valley by their location and design. The approach is that we analyze patterns in house price changes from trough to peak, comparing those changes in new urbanist-style sustainable communities here in the region to the traditional conventional use, single-family detached, auto-oriented communities. We're going to use standard regression techniques where we evaluate the paths and trajectories of house prices from peak to trough, again, comparing new urbanist walk-up type communities to your conventional single-family detached type communities. Again, we're going to use housing market data for the Philadelphia metro area, and eventually we actually hope to expand the study to other metropolitan areas in the U.S. So let's get this started. We'll look at some data first. This is home sales. We have a database on all home sales in the Philadelphia core-based statistical area from 1980 to 2012. Here's a map showing home sales just in a relatively recent quarter, color-coded by price per square foot. We color-code them using what we call the temperature color ramp, so cool colors denote relatively low-priced areas, warm colors denote relatively high-priced areas, and they're carved up based upon the quintiles of the distribution. So if you know what a bell-shaped distribution is, we chop that up in fifths, and that's how we assign the categories there. So looking at the blue dots, which are the 20% cheapest homes in the region, they price less than $65 a foot. You can clearly see North Philadelphia, West Philadelphia, Camden, New Jersey, the inner ring suburbs of Darby and Lansdowne and places like that. Conversely, the red dots are the top 20% highest priced homes in the region. Again, you can clearly see those on the main line, western suburbs, northern Bucks County, as well as in Mercer County in New Jersey, which is actually the highest priced homes in the region, primarily because of Princeton University being located there. So again, you can certainly see significant spatial patterns in house prices. We're going to look at spatial patterns and actually house price changes from peak to trough since the bubble burst to its bottom. So we estimate a series of house price indices by location using regression. Most of you probably know what Case-Shiller is, right? Same technique that Case-Shiller uses, only we actually have more variables in our regression just to be a little more sophisticated. So they produce these house price indices. You can think of them as like a Dow Jones index for a typical home in a typical market. The red line is the house price index for Philadelphia County. This goes back to 1980. The green line is the house price index for the Philadelphia suburbs. And the blue line is the house price index for Center City. The black holes denote the two housing downturns that have occurred during the past 30-year history. So the last housing downturn that occurred was in the early 1990s, from about 1990 to 1994. Again, if you look at the blue line for Center City, it fell by the most. Center City really took down the chin back then. The red line represents Philadelphia County. Also, it fell by a relatively significant amount. The green line, however, is the Philadelphia suburbs. Note that they don't fall. They flatline. I mean, there was a recession in the early 90s. But notice it was the city that took it on the chin, and in particular it was the core downtown area that really took it on the chin. Ed Rendell actually has this great story he tells back when he was mayor in the early 90s when he wanted to get Center City revitalized. And one of the ways he wanted to do it was to revitalize the Walnut Street retail quarter, which back then had a lot of boarded-up shops, homeless people, garbage in the street, graffiti. And he convinced Tiffany Jewelers from New York to come down and take a look at the site behind the Bellevue Hotel. And he called his streets commissioner before they were coming down. He said, look, the guys from Tiffany are coming down, and I think this could really spark the Walnut Street revitalization if we get a an upscale store like that. But I need you to clean up Center City for me. It's a mess. And the streets commissioner said, oh, well, that's pretty expensive. I mean, I don't have the budget for that. I mean, there's graffiti removal involved, and trash removal, and there's homeless people on the streets, and there's boarded up shops. What do you expect me to do with the budget and the time that I have? He said, well, look, I can't have them seeing this stuff. There's no way they're going to locate a Tiffany on Walnut Street in the current condition it's in. The streets commissioner said, well, let me ask you a question. They're coming down from New York, right? He said, yes. He said, so they're coming by train? Yes. So are you picking them up at 30th Street Station? He said, yeah, I'm picking them up in a limo. He said, okay, I have a compromise. You tell me what route you're going to take from 30th Street Station to the site, and I'll clean up that route. And he did. And that's how we got Tiffany's. But that red line, again, that blue line, know how much it deflates in the early 90s. So like I said, Center City really went through a serious depreciation. Conversely, look at the current period, the current downturn. The magnitude of price declines might be relatively greater, that housing in general deflated more during this recent bubble bursting than the last recession. But notice that the pattern is reversed. The blue line, which is Center City, is above the green and the red lines. It fell by the least. Second, the red line has fallen, but again, it's fallen by less than the green line, which is the suburbs. The exact same pattern that occurred in the early 90s has now been reversed during the current decline. The more centrally located you are, the more you've held your value. Here's a bar chart comparing that. The rose bars indicate the total price deflation from peak to trough during the last downturn of the early 90s, whereas the blue lines indicate the price deflation and house values from peak to trough during the current downturn. During the last downturn, Center City fell by a whopping 34% in value from peak to trough. The city fell by about 18% in value, and the suburbs relatively held their value, only deflating by about 14%. Notice how that's reversed with the blue bars. This time the suburbs have fallen by 33%, as much as Center City deflated during the last downturn. Philadelphia County has only fallen by 18%, and Center City has only fallen by about 20%. So again, complete reversal of the historic patterns and price declines. Here's a map color-coding zip codes in the region by their total price deflation from peak to trough by location. So again, the The red areas denote the places that have significantly deflated. Yellow areas denote places that have deflated by less. So the dark red areas are places that deflated by 41% or more. At the other extreme, yellow places are places that, from peak to trough, house prices only fell by less than 13%. Now, the pattern here doesn't appear completely uniform. Again, you definitely notice some clustering here, right? I mean, zip codes that fell by less are clustered near other zip codes that held their value. Conversely, areas that deflated a lot are near other areas that deflated a lot. But in general, you notice that the very red areas occur basically in two places. In the very outer ring areas in the Philadelphia metro area, or in the very low income areas of Philadelphia. Notice North Philadelphia, West Philadelphia, the inner ring western suburbs, working class suburbs of Lansdowne and Upper Darby deflated by quite a bit as well as Trenton, New Jersey. So location would seem to explain some of the patterns of price deflation across the region, but it doesn't explain everything. So here's what we did. We basically created a bunch of variables measuring various new urbanist versus conventional use type characteristics. So the population density of your zip code, the percent of real estate development in your zip code is mixed use, whether or not your zip code has what percent of your housing is walkable to transit, how many subway stops you have in your zip code, how many rail stops you have in your zip code, whether you're located downtown or not, percent of vacancy, and then some socioeconomic characteristics like the poverty rate and such of your zip code. And this is not an academic seminar, so I'm going to spare you all the technical econometric details of this. But basically, to be consistent with CNU's definition of new urbanism, is we identified and classified different characteristics of all these zip codes in the metropolitan area according to CNU's definition of a new urbanist community as having the following characteristics: livable streets arranged in compact walkable blocks, a range of housing choices, schools, stores, nearby destinations, reachable by walking, cycling, or transit, an affirming human scale public ground that is walkable, and so forth. We then created like I said, a database that characterizes every zip code in the region by how sort of new urbanist it is. So again, having all these variables like the measure, number of metro stops, how many cities you are, what your density is, things like that. There's basically 5 categories of variables that govern how new urbanist you are: your density, your location, accessibility to public transportation, socioeconomic characteristics of your community, and then the uses such as single use versus mixed use development. We then created over 50 variables, basically measuring how new urbanist you are. We then basically ran what is called a stepwise regression, which basically measured house prices from peak to trough and identified those variables out of that choice set of 50 that most explained how much you deflated versus how much you relatively held your value. Here's the regression results. So there's about 20 variables or so to explain how much you deflated during this period. There's an R-squared of this regression of 76%, which basically means these variables explain 76% of the variation in house price declines across the region. Again, this is not an academic seminar, so I don't want to get too deep into the regression here. But again, your design characteristics explain quite a bit whether or not your home held its value versus whether it deflated a lot during this period. Here's the key findings. If you were located in Center City, Philadelphia, you were associated with a 9.1% decrease in the magnitude of your house price decline. So like I said, across the region, homes fell by 20% on average. If you were in Philadelphia, your house held its value, only declined by about half as much. Okay, it's the opposite of what happened during the last downturn. Second result, being located in a walkable town center in the suburbs is associated with an 8.8% decrease in the magnitude of house price declines. So in the suburbs, home values on average fell by 25%, but if you were located in a walkable town center in the suburb, you only fell by about 17%. So, okay, relatively held your value. Third result, every mile further that your town is located from Center City, Philadelphia, is associated with a 1.4% increase in the magnitude of house price declines. And this pattern is interesting because it's very fractal. In other words, the more you drill down into localities, the more this pattern repeats itself. So Center City held its value relative to the rest of Philadelphia. Philadelphia held its value relative to the rest of the suburbs. The inner ring suburbs held their value better than the outer ring suburbs. But within that, if you're in a walk-up type area that has transit, that is walkable, that is mixed use, that is relatively higher density, no matter where you're located, you relatively held your value relative to other places. Lastly, every mile further that a suburban zip code is located from Center City is associated with an additional 3% increase in the magnitude of house price decline. So that may not seem like a big number, but it is, because remember, the average decline was around 20% or so. You tack another 3% onto that for each mile further away from downtown Philadelphia you are. That can scale up to some pretty great price declines pretty quick. As this map back here showed you, those red areas are places where house prices fell by more than 40%. I mean, those are Vegas or Detroit type house price declines. The average in this region, like I said, is 20 to 25%. But those areas that are far-flung, that are auto-oriented, that are conventional, single-family detached type ex-urban developments with long commutes to downtown, deflated by quite a bit. And again, it goes back to the story of high energy costs during this period, as well as the renewed interest in downtown and urban living. This is sort of my money shot here from the regression results. I ranked community characteristics by the total price decline. So over on the left-hand side, I have at the peak of the boom is the average house price in the Philadelphia region in 2007, which is about $250,000. Okay, the red line is the current average price, house price in the Philadelphia region right now, which is about $185,000. So all the green bars to the left of the red bar are the relative winners. They're the ones that relatively held their value during this downturn, and that they deflated by less than the average. The green bars to the right of the red bar are the losers, relative losers. Those are how homes that deflated by more than the regional average during this period. And then on the horizontal axis, I've got the community design characteristics. Those are the names of the regression variables in the regression. So for example, over on the left, you see percent high. That's the one right next to the black bar. That's the percent of your community that's high income. They deflated by very little. If you're in the top 25% of high income communities in the region, your homes relatively held their value. Second to that is, third to that is suburban rail. If you live in the suburbs, but you live in a zip code that has a rail stop in it, your home only fell by about $50,000 compared, which is much less than the average during this. Other community characteristics that indicated that homes relatively held their value: if you're mixed use, if your median household income is relatively high, if you're in a zip code that is a suburban town center, if you're in a suburb with bus stops, if you're in a suburb with rail stops, and if you're in a suburb that has a relatively high population density, which of course is consistent with being walkable. So those are the community characteristics that indicated your home relatively held its value. To the right of that red bar are those design characteristics that indicated your community was a relative loser, deflated by more than the regional average. So what indicates that? First of all, distance to CBD. The further you're away from center city, the worse off you are, the more your home fell in value. The poverty rate, the vacancy rate of your community, if you got overbuilt or not. If the percent of homes in your zip code that are detached, notice that one is a really big loser. High zip codes that had a majority of homes that were single-family detached homes fell by more than $100,000 in value from peak to trough during this downturn. And then the big loser all the way out to the right, that very short green bar, that's the percent of your zip code that is residential, purely residential. In other words, if you're not a mixed-use zip code, if you're just, your zip code is nothing but single-family detached residential housing, those are the ones that really took it on the chin. You really interact that with distance to CBD, so the very far-flung ex-urban zip codes that have a very high percentage of single-family detached homes, look how much they fell in value. The regional peak was $250,000. They're down less than $100,000 right now. All right, so they really, really took it. So again, the design characteristics matter, location characteristics matter, usage patterns matter in explaining the patterns that we've seen in house price declines. Although there may be an average decline for any given metropolitan area, a certain percent, within any metropolitan area, there is a great deal of variation, and it seems to be indicated that is explainable by much of the design and location characteristics of the housing stock. So in general, in summary, in the Philadelphia region, house prices decline less in areas that have fewer households living below poverty, and it's a subprime lending story. Those are the ones that really got over-leveraged. Have lower vacancy rates, that is, they didn't overbuild. If you're located in the downtown of the central city, if you're closer to the central city, like an entering suburb, if you're a suburban town center or just close to a suburban town center, if you're in a suburb that is relatively higher density and have attached homes, if you have a balanced mix of both residential and commercial uses, have relatively more businesses, as you, again, a mixture of uses. Suburbs with accessibility to rail and bus stops, or our city neighborhoods with subway stops, those are the areas that outperformed during this downturn. You take away those characteristics, and those are the areas that deflated by more than the average during this downturn. So again, the magnitude of this downturn is not only notable from a historic perspective, but the structure of it as well. And the fact that we've seen, the flight to quality, historically speaking, during recessions was from the city to the suburbs. It was the townhome in the city, or row home in the city that got abandoned. It was the suburban homes in good school districts that held their value. We're seeing that really flip on its head during this downturn. So going forward, I think there's going to be a lot of implications for the nature and type of housing that Americans will be living in, and the operation of our housing markets going forward. And with that, I thank you very much.